Relax and listen to the voice. All roads lead to London. I'm sorry, Billy stuttered. I seem to be lost. Don't worry, Shane smiled. I know where we are. You're going exactly where you're supposed to. Billy risked taking his eyes off the road for a second to sneak a glance at Shane. He was shorter than Billy, with a jet-black buzz cut, weathered skin, and a fine, slightly shiny suit. Strange for a hitchhiker, he thought. It was strange that Billy had picked up a hitchhiker. I don't know how I got lost heading to London, Billy said. I swear, every road in England has signs to London. Aye, seems about true. Shane crossed his arms. His suit sleeve pulled back to reveal a gold watch with an orange-red face that flickered in the light of the fire. Is that, Irish, I hear? Billy was British. Very British. He grew up in a village a short walk from the Norfolk Broads, where folk from the next village are treated with suspicion. You didn't treat those from further afield with suspicion. Suspicion gives them chance. Shane laughed. It was a scratchy laugh, a bump in the road away from a coughing fit. Ought to be careful with a question like that, lad. I'm Roma. Least I was. Billy shifted in his seat as he swerved around a pothole. That's one of those, travelers, right? He'd heard things about travelers. Unlike travelers with a small T, who might stop in the village pub for a drink and realize a second would be a bad idea. Travelers would set up a shop in a field in a group too large to kick out. It's one traveling community, aye? Shane replied with a collective tone of any community typically referred to as them. Maybe I just shouldn't talk, Billy thought. He watched waves of British fields flowing past, broken by hedgerows and populated by schools of sheep and cows. He should have found it comforting, but the lack of landmarks made it even harder to place himself. I'm not as well acquainted with this side of London, said Shane. Were we in Buckinghamshire or Oxfordshire? Billy could have been in Scotland for all he knew. A small windmill had crept over the horizon, but that meant nothing to him. Buckinghamshire, he said. What does it matter? They're basically the same, he thought. Good memories of old Bucks. Good money here, and an appreciation of fine art. Gullible as poodles, though. We used to carve faces into pieces of tree bark and sell 'em 50 quid apiece. He raised a finger to Billy. Billy didn't want to take his eyes off the road. A blind left turn was coming up. But in the edge of his vision, the finger looked unusually long, and the nail strangely pointed. That's one of our tricks. Don't tell no one. Billy laughed nervously. He didn't like Shane's sense of humor. As he turned the corner, a blue sign revealed itself, half covered by the hedgerow. It said, Elcombe, Kinghamshire. Crap, thought Billy. Must have been in Oxfordshire. I bet I'll take the piss all the way to London. You said we were already in Bucks. It didn't sound like taking the piss. Shane sounded hurt. You pulling a fast one on me? What else you lying about? Is your name even Sam? Billy nearly swerved off the road in shock. What? I never said, my name is... Shane burst into laughter. A real belly laugh that made Billy's little Nissan Micra shake. Don't worry. I'm messing with you, Billy. Billy couldn't even feign humor at that. The rest of the journey should have taken 2 hours on a bad day. Billy was having a very bad day. He drove past endless fields and through countless countryside towns. Every couple of hours, Shane would declare, "Need a whiz." They'd stop on a cobbled street in front of a pub named the King's Arms or the Jester's Head. The medieval sign swinging on the front always showed a cartoon character that Billy found strangely familiar. They'd pick up a drink, take a whiz, and then carry on. After the third stop, Billy said, "We should have arrived hours ago. I'm sorry. I have no idea where I'm going." "They never do." Shane shook his head, sounding like an executioner apologizing before they swing the axe. He might have said, "I'm sorry, you're about to die, but I can't wait to see how far the blood spurts." "I'm sure I've seen these fields before," Billy continued, "though I guess they all look—" Billy realized what Shane had said and replied, "Who is they?" Shane turned to Billy, looking almost sad. "The souls I pick up." What is he talking about? Billy thought. I picked him up. But he didn't recall picking Shane up. He didn't recall the start of the journey for that matter. "The souls you—" "Haven't seen that yet," Shane interrupted. A railway line was a few dozen meters ahead. Somehow Billy hadn't seen it before. The accelerator suddenly felt light as the car lost speed. Billy noticed the red fuel light. "How in the hell did I miss that?" he thought. "We've been driving for hours, and I've never stopped for fuel. How is that even—" "It's odd, don't you think?" said Shane quietly. "How humans don't see the end of their journeys, though they can often sense it." The car approached the track. Billy pressed the brake, but there was no resistance, and the car rolled on. They know it will end, sometimes even want it to, but they think they can always stretch it out a little longer and never truly believe it will ever actually end. They came to a halt on the track. Billy felt the rumble of the earth reverberating through the steering wheel before he saw the train. I don't know what's going on, but we have to get the fuck out." He pulled the door handle, but nothing happened. "Jess Archer couldn't get out." Shane looked down like he was mourning. "Her head hit the passenger window. She was lucky." He looked at Billy, his face contorted into a caricature of misery. "Tyler King broke one arm on the rear passenger side window and dislocated the other holding on to your chair. He died in agony, unable to turn away from the twisted face of his dead girlfriend." The memories flooded back. "Oh my God, I'm fucking dead?" cried Billy. "Am I fucking dead?" Shane's face twisted into a hideous grin. "That you are, but God won't help you here." The train was plowing toward them. Billy yanked the door handle. "I thought I could make it over the line." "You were drunk." Shane cracked his knuckles. "The train should have stopped." Billy continued to ineffectively tug at the door handle. "You shouldn't have bet your friends' lives that it would." Shane dug the nails of his left hand into the driving wheel, pulling himself toward Billy. Billy felt Shane's fiery breath on the back of his neck, but he couldn't pull his attention away from the track. The train was a few dozen meters away. Billy started punching the window. Blood left translucent spots on the window. Billy felt a bone in his hand snap. He cried out, "Ah! What the fuck? Let me out!" The train was just meters away, and then It vanished. Billy's chest was heaving. His face was hot and sticky from sweat and tears. He threw up on his lap. He sobbed. It wasn't my fault, he said between breaths. Shane had settled back in the passenger seat. Drive. The voice was guttural and acidic. The engine burst into life. Billy had a feeling of déjà vu, an abyssal feeling that he'd been through this hell before, and that he'd relive it again and again began to grow. Unable to stop himself, he pulled off. Searing pain pulsed through his hand where he'd held the steering wheel, sticky with blood. A rotten stench filled his little car. Despite knowing he'd been here before, despite the pain and the stench, he drove. The details in his memory became hazy, and then distant. Then they disappeared entirely. And then he was driving again, somewhere north of Oxford, with a strange man in the passenger seat, and a strong feeling that he was meant to be driving to London. I'm sorry, Billy stuttered. I seem to be lost. What happened to Tommy? The Johnson family. How would I describe them? Well, in 3 words actually. Mysterious, rich, and famous. A reporter named Donna Cross, obsessed with finding the truth about what really happened to the youngest member, came from the next town over. She introduced herself to the Johnsons. The family consisted of 6 people. Sarah, the mother. Joseph, the father. Then there are the kids. Janice, Stephanie, Harry, and John. There used to be 7 members, but the youngest member mysteriously disappeared. Tommy was just 4 years old when he went missing. After several weeks, his disappearance became a story of the past. Nobody questioned it, but everyone in the town suspected one of the kids had murdered him. Most of the kids were in line to take over the Johnson family business, but one stood out from the rest. Harry. He used to go around town looking for trouble. He didn't fit in with the rest of the family, and everyone knew it. It was probably because Harry wasn't biologically a Johnson. Harry was adopted at birth. His mother was a mental patient, and his father was her doctor. When the Johnsons adopted him, they knew it was in his DNA to eventually snap, but they weren't prepared for what happened all those years ago. The Johnsons lived on top of a hill overlooking the town. They had a nice lake in the back, an indoor pool for the kids to play in. Things for the Johnson kids couldn't be better. All of the kids are now grown up. After several weeks of Tommy's disappearance, the case just disappeared as quickly as he did. Donna was a young reporter when Tommy disappeared, and she was drawn to the investigation from the start. Everyone else forgot about it, but she didn't. She saw as everyone else forgot about poor little Tommy. She didn't want to give up on him. Something happened to him, and Donna was going to figure it out. She went to her boss after all these years and asked for the job. They were trying to get her to quit or find an excuse to fire her, so with a crooked smile, he agreed. He didn't think she would come back with a story, so he was already writing her termination letter. Donna headed her way to the town, 3 hours away. And now we're back to where we started. She got to know the family, stayed there for a few nights to get a feel for them. Her intuition told her to leave the minute she took Harry's hand. She should have listened to the voice in her head, but she failed to acknowledge it. You see, Harry went back to his normal self until Donna came around. Everyone else had been paid off years ago. Donna was in another town, so they didn't notice her until she just showed up at their doorstep. In the back of her mind, Sarah Johnson was worried that their secret would get out, or worse, her son would strike again. So Sarah went into her study and grabbed her checkbook. $10,000 should do the trick. She wanted to protect her son. She knew it wasn't his fault. And Donna grew angry as Sarah clicked her way into the room. Sarah grew teary as she walked closer to the room because Donna was staying in Tommy's old room. It brought dread and sadness as she breathed in the air her son once breathed. As she handed Donna the check, there was a sense of shame in her eyes. She felt sorry that she had to protect Harry, but the Johnson family name would be disgraced if the truth got out. And by now, I think you know what happened. Tommy went missing that fateful day on the 6th of May. At least that's the story that everyone knew, but it wasn't really the whole truth. Sarah thought back to that day. The kids were playing by the pool. Most of them were finished playing by 3 o'clock, but Harry and Tommy were left. Harry tried to get Tommy back into the house. Harry was only 8 at the time, so trying to lift a 4-year-old to get him back into the house was a pain to begin with. However, Tommy didn't want to go back into the house. He screamed and kicked so hard that Harry accidentally dropped him into the pool. Tommy couldn't swim yet, and Harry was mad at him, so he just wanted his brother to suffer for a few minutes. He regretted it when his brother started to sink to the bottom. He quickly jumped in to get him, but it was too late. Sarah worried as they tried to revive him, but he swallowed too much water. He was dead, and they buried him in an unmarked grave. Sarah had half a mind to send Harry to the mental hospital where his birth mom was, but she couldn't. She didn't have the heart to, and she thought that he had just slipped up. It took several years for her to share that story with anyone. She shared the story with Donna only because she was tired of lying, and Donna didn't accept the check. The next day, she checked with all the other people in the family except for Harry. She was going to talk to him last. She spoke with the eldest Johnson. Janice talked about how from the minute he was brought home from the hospital that she had gotten a bad vibe from him. He was a calm baby, a little too calm for her liking. When her sister, Stephanie, was born, she cried all the time. It was normal, and when she was told that their parents were going to adopt a new baby, it was only a few months after her sister was born. She found her brother's quietness a little odd. Even as they grew older and the second youngest was born, he was distant from the whole family. He even lashed out at his mom when she was pregnant with John. He hit her stomach and caused John to hate him even before he was born. Same with Tommy, too. Over the course of 3 days, she almost had enough knowledge for her article. She only needed to get Harry's side of the story. Unfortunately, though, their story would end with her. They went to the family room to talk. Harry gave Donna everything she asked for, and then ended her life just like that. She had finally finished writing everything she needed down in her notebook, and she got struck in the head by a bus that Harry had grabbed in a panic. He thought that she would publish it, and everything would be out in the open, and he would go to prison. Instead, he killed her and the family covered for him yet again by hiding her body and getting rid of the evidence. They burned all of her work and got rid of her car to make it look like she went back home. She was buried in the backyard where Tommy was. Her boss reported her missing about a week later, and Sarah paid everyone off again like she did years ago. Donna's disappearance became a mystery, just like Tommy's, and nobody will ever find out, thanks to the power of money. They also finally broke and took Harry to the mental hospital, where he started getting help. It would only be a matter of time before someone starts to ask questions about the reporter who went missing. The Johnsons only hope that they won't have to cover up a third murder for Harry's screw-ups. The first one, they could have just said it was an accident, but Donna's death was intentional. He can get into way more trouble if Donna's death becomes public. Everyone in the family would too, since they covered for him. Joseph also admitted to Donna, as they had their interview, that he regrets adopting Harry. He knew adopting a baby from a mental patient was not a good idea, and he was right. Harry would eventually become better, but it wasn't until after he went to the mental hospital that he did. Does he regret what he did? Maybe. I wouldn't be able to tell you. He wouldn't even tell the truth if you asked him. He had been lying for over 10 years. And whose fault was that? It was his mother's. She didn't want to ruin her precious reputation in the small town, so she bribed all of her kids and everyone else to lie about the situation from the start.
A new friend. Claudia and her mother and father live in an old house in a normal neighborhood on a nondescript street. Meadowburn Lane, to be exact, in a small Midwestern town so ordinary that most people driving through immediately forget the name of it before they've passed the town's limit sign on the way out. At least that's the way it's been on Meadowburn Lane before the accident. Since then, life on the lane has occasionally become less mundane. Claudia and her mother both remember the night of the accident well. They remember it, but they don't talk about it. The accident is the only one of several things Claudia and her mother don't talk about. Claudia and her mother live in the upstairs rooms of the old house now. An elderly couple lives in the downstairs rooms of the old house on the ground floor. Claudia and her mother refer to the elderly couple as Grandma and Grandpa, even though they are no relation. Grandma and Grandpa are meant to be affectionate and otherwise innocent names for the elderly couple. Claudia borrows books from the elderly couple or steals them, depending on your perspective. Claudia always returns them, so she considers it borrowing. Claudia's mother has no idea her daughter sneaks into the elderly couple's rooms in the wee hours of the night to take and return books, so she has no opinion on whether this is stealing or not. Claudia spends most of her time reading the books she borrows/steals from the elderly couple. When she isn't reading, Claudia stares at the attic window at the vacant house across the street. The vacant house across the street is soon to be the occupied house across the street. This has happened before, but the house across the street has never stayed occupied long, always reverting to being the vacant house across the street. Claudia and her mother talk about the house across the street when it's occupied. They never talk about the house across the street when it's vacant. Claudia is excited because the house across the street being occupied means a new family will be coming to Meadowburn Lane, with the possibilities of a new child on the lane, the possibilities of a new friend. If the new family has a child near Claudia's age and she becomes friends with Claudia, Claudia hopes that maybe the friend and her family won't flee in terror in the middle of the night, never to be seen on the lane ever again. All morning, moving company men have been carrying nondescript boxes out of the moving van and into the house across the street. The new family has not arrived on Meadowburn Lane yet. only their belongings. Claudia watches from the attic window, anxiously looking for signs of a child in the items removed from the moving van. So far, Claudia has only seen nondescript boxes. The sun moves over the top of the house where Claudia lives, shining in her attic window now. Claudia knows she should stay out of the sun because sunshine makes her many scars hurt. Claudia can feel her skin tighten in reaction to the sunshine, can feel the ache start to grow up her arms and across her face. The shining red SUV slows as it approaches down Meadowburn Lane. The SUV pulls into the driveway of the house across the street. A new family is here. Claudia forgets about how the sun makes the many scars on her skin hurt. She can't see through the dark tinted windows of the SUV as it stops. A man gets out of the driver's side of the SUV. A woman gets out of the passenger side. The man opens the back door on his side. Claudia's excitement peaks. A dog lumbers out of the open door. Claudia sags in disappointment. Claudia does not want a dog as a new friend. The man and the woman across the street smile and talk and look at their new house. Claudia can see their lips moving and smiling. She can't hear what they're saying. Claudia is losing interest in what now looks like it will become nothing more than a new couple across the street with a lumbering dog. Not even new after a few months. The still new, for now, couple across the street stands in front of the SUV, their backs to Claudia. The shiny red SUV is less shiny than it was just a moment ago. The new couple turning rather drab and ordinary as Claudia steps back out of the harmful sunshine into the cool shadows of the attic room. Before Claudia can return to her reading of stolen/borrowed books, the woman half of the new couple across the street turns around. Claudia can see the woman's lips move but can't hear what she's saying as she says something in the direction of the SUV. The rear door on the woman's side of the SUV pops open slightly. A small hand pushes the rear door open slowly. Claudia steps back into the sunshine at the attic door, her palms pressed against the window. It has been ages since the skin on the palms of Claudia's hands have been exposed directly to sunlight. The tender flesh on Claudia's palms burn like she's placed her hands on a hot grill. Claudia does not notice. Feet have appeared in the now open rear door of the SUV. The feet are small and the feet are wearing gleaming white tennis shoes. Hips wearing jean shorts appear, followed by a body in a t-shirt, a shoulder, and finally a head with a face. A girl, a little girl, but not so little, a girl of maybe 10 to 12, nicely matching Claudia's apparent age. The girl turns her face as the man and the woman did, to look at their house, which will now become the house across the street where the new family with the little girl lives on Meadowburn Lane. But no, the girl is not looking around like the man and woman looked around. The girl has found the sunshine with her face and she stopped. Is the girl basking in the sun's glow and warmth? The woman comes back to the girl and takes her by the elbow. The lumbering dog comes up to the girl and she reaches down for the handle strapped to the dog's back. The man, woman, girl, and dog walk up the driveway and up the sidewalk and disappear into the house across the street. The dog, no longer lumbering, guided the girl up the walk as the family walked into the house. Claudia guesses that the little girl is blind. Claudia and her mother don't talk about the house across the street when it's vacant because it brings up only unpleasant memories. Claudia and her mother do talk about the house across the street when it is occupied in the hopes of not creating more unpleasant memories. Claudia and her mother have a talk about the new family in the house across the street later that afternoon. Claudia forgets everything she talks about with her mother late that afternoon as soon as they are finished talking. Claudia sneaks unseen into the little blind girl's bedroom across the street to hide in the closet, to wait for the little blind girl to come to her room to go to bed. Claudia is very good at sneaking unseen. Claudia worries while she waits. The part that comes next is the part that Claudia fears. The part that comes soon is where Claudia's other potential new friends got scared and ran away with their families, never to be seen again on the lane. Claudia starts to think about Billy, but tries not to remember. Billy was a silly boy. Yes, silly Billy. But he was too silly and too easily scared. Claudia starts to remember Valerie, the little girl before the new little girl, but tries not to think about her. Valerie was a serious little girl. Serious Valerie. That's not funny at all. But she got so scared and ran away with her whole family anyway, just like silly Billy. Claudia knows she is hard to look at, maybe even scary to look at. Valerie and Billy did not give Claudia a chance. When they got scared, Claudia tried to be very angry with Billy and Valerie so that she would get her way and they would stay. Claudia learned about being angry to get your way from watching her father, who frequently got angry and always got his way, at least until the night of the accident. Claudia wondered if maybe the little blind girl won't be scared because she can't see Claudia. The little blind girl comes into the room without her blind girl guide dog. The little blind girl's mother yells, "Good night," to Charlotte as Charlotte closes the bedroom door. Charlotte takes off her jean shorts and t-shirt. Then she gets dressed for bed, then gets into bed, but she doesn't lay down. Charlotte asks quietly if there is someone there in the room with her. Claudia says, as unscary as she can, to not be afraid. Please, please, do not be afraid. Claudia says that she is a friend. Claudia says again to not be afraid. My name is Claudia, and please, please, please don't be afraid. I live across the street. I don't have any friends, and I'm so lonely sometimes. Everyone is always afraid of me when they see me, but you can't see me. So please, please, please don't be afraid. I want to be a friend. Charlotte asks, why are people afraid of you? Are you a monster? Claudia thinks about Charlotte's question for a moment, then answers, maybe I am. Claudia's father is late getting home when the accident is just hours away. Her father travels extensively for business and is frequently away from the home for days at a time. When he is at home, one of Claudia's favorite pastimes is to sit with her father in his big high-back velvet chair in the library and take turns reading to one another. They started this particular habit back before Claudia could even read, when it was just her father reading and her listening. Her participation started with her making up stories, just pretending to read, and slowly progressed as she learned to read. Her mother doesn't join in with them, not that Claudia minds. It is her special time just with her father, and her mother is always too busy to participate anyways, cooking, cleaning, and keeping the house in order. She is concerned, though, that her father seems to be enjoying their reading times less and less recently. Rather than complimenting Claudia on how well she reads and how big she is getting, he is more likely to fidget and complain that she's getting too big to comfortably sit in the chair with him, and that the stories she chooses are too mature for her, or simply too filled with romance and silly feminine ideas to be proper for a young girl. She hopes to shift that tendency tonight. Tonight she's pulled down one of her father's treasured books, a first edition Dickens, and has it set reverently next to his chair along with his pipe filled with special tobacco. When her father does finally come through the door, hours after Claudia and her mother have expected him, he's in a bad mood, ranting about the imbeciles he is forced to employ and the equal incompetent fools that are supposedly running the government, though never to his liking or advantage. Claudia's mother says that he is in a rage when he's like this, and she has warned Claudia to never do anything to upset him more when he is in a rage. While the father is yelling at the mother that their dinner is cold and why the hell is she standing there, go warm it up, Claudia runs to the library to get the Dickens novel and her father's pipe, sure that sitting and reading one of his favorite stories is just the remedy he needs right now to relax and forget about all his worries. She knows he doesn't approve of running in the house, so she makes sure to walk as she comes back into the dining room. Her mother is retreating to the kitchen to rewarm whatever they were meant to have for dinner, and her father is pacing around, grumbling under his breath. He stops his pacing and watches as his daughter crosses the room to him, book in one hand and pipe in the other, held out to him as a peace offering or perhaps a reminder of happier times. Her father looks down at what she is holding, then up into her face with a startled expression. She smiles at him but says nothing. Her gesture shouldn't need any explanation. A smile starts to bloom on his face, only to evolve into a sneer. His ranting resumes, now focused on Claudia. "Who told you could touch my books? I suppose you've been pawing through all my belongings. Look at the mess you've made with all my valuable tobacco. Ruined. Will likely have to be thrown out." Claudia stands frozen in place, her arms still absurdly outstretched and imploring her now raging father to read with her. Her smile having disappeared to be replaced by a look of confusion that is quickly dwindling to regret. She has been spared the experience of the physical side of her father's wrath so far in her short life, so she is more disappointed than afraid. But as she turns to retreat to the library in hopes of somehow undoing what she has done wrong, she sees her mother, also frozen but stiff with fear. She stands in the archway holding a pot with oven mittens, steam rising from the contents. From behind her, Claudia hears her father's voice, eerily calm now, but menacing nonetheless. "You allowed this to happen? Upstairs, now!" Without a word, her mother sits the dish on the table and mounts the stairs toward the bedroom, her father following closely in her wake. Left alone, Claudia's disappointment rises back through confusion, but turns toward anger now. She has waited days and days for her father to return, has planned their special time together, all to be thrown aside with barely any notice. She doesn't know exactly what her father and mother do when he is mad and they go upstairs, but she knows that her mother doesn't like it. Still, it is time they spend together that her father could be spending with her. Claudia looks at the book and the pipe she holds, and though she doesn't completely understand why, she wants to break them. She goes back into the library, goes and sits in her father's big chair, even though she isn't allowed to without him. She doesn't care. A box of matches sit underneath the smoking stand. Claudia has never struck a match before, but she's seen her father do it on many occasions. She opens the Dickens novel, dumps a good pile of tobacco in the pages, and tries to light it on fire. It takes her several tries to get a match lit, and several lit matches before the book catches. As it starts to spread deeper into the pages and the tobacco finally lights, the smoke starts to get thicker. Claudia tries to lean back in the chair and escape the smoke, but it makes her cough, and the coughs send the burning bits of tobacco aloft. Some of them drift back down and land unseen on her dress and on the chair. Still coughing, her eyes blurry with fumes, Claudia kicks out the stand, pushing the worst of the flames away from her by a few inches, but closer toward the bookshelf. Her eyes are still burning a moment later when she first feels the heat from her burning dress. Her father rushes into the room after hearing his daughter's screams. The smoking stand, now a flaming torch, propped against one of the bookcases. He grabs the heavy woolen rug from the floor and uses it to smother the flames, keeping the fire from spreading further and saving the house and most of his book collection. If he had done the same for his daughter when he first rushed in, he might have saved her life. Claudia has known for many years the person she calls her mother now was not really her mother anymore, but rather her ghost. Her mother killed herself a month after Claudia died. Strangely, Claudia does not know that she herself is a ghost, but believes that she is a heavily scarred little girl who just so happens to never age, never need to eat, or really sleep, and who never, ever leaves Meadowburn Lane. Claudia remembers some of her real life, little to none of what has happened to her in the house on Meadowburn Lane over the last 60 years, except for the incident with Billy and Valerie. Incidents and accidents are easily remembered, scarred into the memory with pain, disappointment, and loneliness. Claudia remembers the day of the accident in perfect detail. Claudia and Charlotte become good friends, secret friends. They create new memories over the next couple years together. These are good memories, imprinted with friendship and contentment. These are new kinds of memories for Claudia. But Charlotte is growing older, and unfortunately Claudia is not. Claudia is starting to remember the loneliness, and that makes her mad. And Claudia never forgot how to strike a match.
Photograph. I'm grateful to Linda for being there for me after her mom died. It probably should have been the other way around, but I had loved her mom too. Besides, I was the last one to see her alive. We had a big art project coming up, and most of the kids stayed back since Linda's mom offered extra help after school. She was our art teacher. Linda herself went home early, saying that art was half talent and half pain, and that it was a pain to stay back after school. Linda was a natural. Her mind could see things clearly, and her hands portrayed them on a canvas without a second thought. She was pretty too. Straight dark hair that grew to her shoulders, brown eyes, and a wide smile that lifted her sharp cheekbones gently like waves that never crashed. The only thing she lacked for art back then was the pain, but not anymore. Nobody got through life without getting hurt. I've never been good with faces. I have an easier time remembering names. It has been so long since I've even looked at a picture of Linda that I have trouble placing all her features correctly. In my mind, she turns into a surreal picture done by the likes of a Picasso, with all her features stacked on her face like pizza toppings. All those times I had gazed at her face did nothing to help me recall. I was the last kid with Linda's mom, and we walked home together. Our houses were across one another. The neighborhood smelled of old paint and trash. Snowflakes rocked above us, fighting gravity to stay off the dirty, cracked pavement. I heard footsteps behind us. Linda's mom didn't turn around, so I didn't either. Maybe we should have. Who knows if looking back ever really saves anyone? A pale, bony hand shot between us and latched onto Linda's mom's purse like a wild animal. That hand, long and thin, was burned into my memory in an instant. It was the only image I could ever recall in perfect detail. The hand yanked the purse so hard that Linda's mom slipped on the icy pavement. Somehow she was still holding on to the purse. Why? The man had bent over Linda's mom, hand still on her purse like it was a handcuff binding them together. He produced a knife, seemingly out of air, and stuck it into her chest, all the way up to the hilt. I heard a slight cracking noise and realized that humans really do have bones in them. Linda's mom was left on the ground, arms still outstretched, but holding on to nothing. She took my hand and looked up at me like a young child looking at her mother. I didn't know where the hospital was back then. I didn't even know where my own house was. I just wanted to get back before dark. She stood up, and I thought that she was the strongest woman in the world. I thought that she wasn't hurt at all, and that she would never die. A dark puddle was growing on her shirt. I remember thinking how nervous she must have been to be sweating that much. This was before I learned about blood and adrenaline. She walked me back to my house and collapsed in the snowy driveway. I shook her a few times for good measure before running in and getting my mom and dad. Why hadn't I told her to go to the emergency room immediately? I shook her. I must as well have poked her with a stick like she was a dead animal on the side of the road. That pale hand started it all, and since I hadn't seen his face, it was all I had. I saw it stretched out in the darkness of my dreams. My parents saved up to send me to a decent college. Linda's dad didn't talk to me or anyone else throughout the whole funeral process, and as far as I know, Linda never went to college. I spent my free time, the few hours I lay awake every night, thinking about Linda. She had been doing art on the side, painting and photography. The two looked almost identical. Her paintings had an uncanny realism, and her photographs had an undeniable dreaminess. She never left town even though I reckoned she had the money. I stayed here too. I figured I might as well be buried here one day with my dad and Linda's mom, and there was no point in making someone drag my dead body back, even if I was getting pretty skinny. My mom was still alive, but she had no plans of leaving town either. The two of us lived our own lives in this little town. Once or twice, we even ran into each other in the grocery store, like strangers. I set up my own office and practiced therapy. I had some competition at first, but in time, I found a small but dedicated, maybe crazy, but who wasn't, collection of clients. If I saw my clients outside the office, I ignored them unless they said hello first. I was the model therapist if there ever was one. Maybe there wasn't, after all, because when Linda called and asked if she could schedule an appointment with me, I had stammered that the first session would be free in case that she did not find me a good fit. A good fit, like some shoes. Is that all I was, after all? A shoe for people to walk on until they feel better? To rub the dirtiest part of themselves on, whether that be their soul or their soul. My practice had amounted to listening. It was all I was good for. I quit typing Linda's name into Google a few years after I started the practice. When I searched her up again, hunched over my computer in my apartment, I found that she had managed to hold a few exhibits for her art. She was gaining traction for her art and had just opened a new exhibition. The next morning, she paced into my office like a child entering the darkest part of a forest alone. She greedily absorbed every detail of my office with glowing brown eyes before she even glanced at me. I could hardly take my eyes off her. My palms had been sweating all morning, and I wondered if the gray sweater I'd chosen was a little thick. I started the session with a smile that I had practiced in the mirror since my grad school days. I understood actual therapy wasn't something I could memorize. I could review my notes from each patient, not that I really bothered with detailed notes, since I could remember pretty much any information my clients disclosed to me. The only thing I memorized was the smile I began my sessions with. I offered it to Linda when she entered, and when she didn't return it, I wondered if, like the sweater, it might just be too thick. I told Linda to make herself comfortable on the beige couch I'd installed in front of my chair in the office, and asked her how she was doing. "You designed this office nicely," she said. "Well, thanks," I laughed. "That means quite a lot coming from you." "Did you do it yourself?" I nodded. "Very professional, but also kinda comfortable." She sounded so normal. I guess I wasn't sure what kind of person I expected my childhood friend to turn into, but surely not the kind that sat around and talked about interior decoration or the weather or weekend plans all the time. I took a deep breath. I had seen her on my computer all these years and forgotten that really we hadn't seen each other in a long time. Small talk was only natural. I chuckled to ease the sudden silence we'd slipped into. I had no kids and no steady girlfriend either, so there was nothing particularly unprofessional to hang in my office. I had designed the office with 3 large windows, covering the entire top half of the 3 walls behind and on either side of the beige couch. This way, when I sat in my chair, I had a view of the endless gray sky outside, which had a calming effect on the retinas and matched nicely with my favorite gray sweater. "Can I show you something I've been working on?" she asked. "It's from my newest exhibit. I know having me as a client is a conflict of interest, but I really wanted to show you." I blushed when she mentioned the conflict of interest, praying that Linda hadn't told my secretary about our former friendship. For the longest time, Linda had been the only friend I could make, and I had been the only friend she would have. "Of course," I said. Linda reached into the pocket of her thick black North Face jacket, which she had unzipped but never taken off. She pulled out a photograph that was all dark, with only an odd pale circle near the center. I felt the heat drain from my face, leaving behind a cold, hard porcelain mask, as if all my features had stiffened into stone. "It's from an exhibit called Linda's Nightmare. Critics are praising it for chiaroscuro. Can you believe that?" Linda laughed. I paled further. Her laugh hadn't changed. Neither did her attitude towards art. What had she always said? Half luck and half bullshit. "What is it?" I asked. "Here's where it gets weird, but I don't want to scare you," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "You can talk about anything you'd like in here," I said slowly, working to control my voice. "Remember when you were a kid, how you were scared of everything?" She kept laughing. I had been scared of stray cats, the dark, snowstorms, slippery roads, and leafless trees. Unfortunate fears for someone living in a small city in the middle of Canada. "I'm not scared anymore," I said, surprised at how high my voice came out. "All right, here's the thing I haven't told anyone, but I'll tell you as my old friend. I've been getting these nightmares for the longest time. I wake up in bed, and there's a tall, pale man standing over me, just the way that you had described him. His features are hard to make out, but I can almost fill them in for myself. In my mind, I mean. He stands there looking at me, and then he grabs my ankle. His hand's freezing, by the way. He drags me off the bed, and he has a purse around his shoulder, the one he took from my mom. He picks me up and drops me into the purse, and he closes it. It's so dark and cramped in there, and all I can do is sit and wait to wake up. It was the same nightmare I used to have. All the details were perfect." "You must think I'm crazy," Linda finished. "What's the picture?" I asked. Linda smiled. "Right. I just wanted to make sure you had the real context. I managed to get a photograph of him." "What?" "I'd gone to sleep with my camera on my nightstand. I needed a new exhibit, and inspiration wasn't coming, so I'd started sleeping with it next to me. And then when I had the nightmare, I looked around and I managed to snap a picture of the bastard before he put me in the bag. I don't think it would do well if I wasn't famous already, honestly, but the exhibit's doing all right." "You took a real picture from your nightmare?" Linda just nodded. "How'd you do it?" "I don't know, but I guess nightmares have a positive side after all." I asked if I could see the picture again. It was just a Polaroid. I could just make out his face hovering at the edge of the frame. His features blended in with the darkness around him so that I could only see their outlines. "I think I'm having these nightmares because of you," she laughed. The way you described the man that killed my mom all those years ago, I don't know if you remember, but you had a way with words. Do you ever dream about him? No, never, I said. I felt the urge to stand up and leave the room. Linda was watching me closely, guarding me almost. I'm sorry, I said. Would you like to talk over a cup of coffee? I don't think I can be your therapist. It was my mistake setting this up in the first place. There is a conflict of interest. What do you mean? You're having nightmares because of an event we both experienced. My mother was killed. I just don't think I can help you as an objective therapist. Because you were there and I wasn't? I swallowed and sat in silence as if waiting for some sinister creature to pass us by. We both feel a deep emotional pain from this, I said. I was her daughter. I'm not arguing with that. I forced myself to smile in the hopes that Linda might copy me. What rested on her face was more of a scowl. Her eyes glowed as if illuminated by something in her head. The smile she had been wearing before had been taken off. When she finally smiled again, it was different. I could see her teeth. She had taken care to polish them to a brilliant luster like fresh snow. She gave me the same smile in the next few sessions. She just kept booking appointments and showing up, no matter how many times I asked her to stop. Why had she come into my life all of a sudden? 3 sessions later, I decided I'd had enough. I told the secretary not to let her in and refused to see her. That was when she barged into my office, sat on the couch, and asked me a simple question. The girl in reception ran after her and apologized for letting her in. It's not your fault, said Linda. I barged in. Couldn't agree more. It's all right, Susan. You can go back. I'll escort Linda out myself. The receptionist, Susan, nodded and scurried out of the room. I heard her hurried footsteps before she plunked on her chair and stayed there. I looked at Linda with what I hoped was a stern expression while I racked my mind for something to say. Why won't you help me? She asked. I studied her face and hoped I would remember it for a long time. She was still so pretty. The next few weeks, she showed up outside my office. When Susan quit without reason, she applied for the job. Sometimes when I drove home, I would see her walking near my house, and I would circle the neighborhood until I thought I lost her. At home, I kept looking at pictures of her. I wondered if she was looking up my name, too. Sometimes when the house was too quiet, my hand reached toward the phone in my pocket to call Linda. But then what would I say? What could I really do for her? The quiet in my home mocked me. It turned every noise against me, magnifying the creaking of the floorboards into monstrous shrieks and the chiming of the clock in the kitchen to gunshots. One time, as I drove past her walking around my street, I took a picture of her on my phone, and that night held it in front of my eyes until I fell asleep on the couch. I awoke in my bed without feeling any part of my body. It must be a dream. It had been so long since I had had one. Somehow, after all my study and seeking my own therapy, I had managed not only to rid myself of the pale man nightmares, but of dreams altogether. Not having nightmares every night felt strange at first, as if I lost a portion of my life, but without dreams, it was a lot easier for me to wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night. Nothing to dread, and nothing to get excited about. I looked up through the darkness and I saw a silhouette standing in front of me with its long arms placid by its sides. The pale man had returned. There was something on his head now. Hair. Long, straight hair just past his shoulders. It grabbed my ankle and I felt a chilling cold spread to my chest and fill my lungs with ice. I felt such intense fear, I exhaled frost. The pale man, or whatever it was, held up a rectangular object, and I saw it flash for a moment in the complete darkness. It must have been his knife. I screamed for help, but hollow men made no noise. Instead, the scream reverberated in my own body and tore apart my organs like a violent storm. I had not been able to help Linda, nor her mom. I would not be able to help anyone, least of all myself. The object in its hand flashed again, and then it said something. "Say cheese, Tommy." Linda's next exhibit was simply called His Nightmare. Critics praised it for its raw emotion. The critics loved to see real pain. Half pain and half bullshit, and half luck and half talent. Give it 200%. I stayed with an old woman in the mountains. I've had the same friends since high school, but as the years passed, it became more difficult to see them often. We used to live within 10 minutes of each other, a nostalgic memory now that everyone had moved to various points around the country. To stay in each other's lives, we decided to commit to meeting up somewhere each summer. I've never liked flying, but after last year, it has become a much more preferable option. The plan was to stay at a cabin in Maine, and instead of flying, I elected to take the 2-day drive. Luckily, a family friend knew someone who ran a bed and breakfast around the halfway point and offered to set up a reservation for me. At the end of the first day of travel, the sun had been down for nearly 2 hours when I happened upon a gas station. After parking, I read the rest of the directions given to me, only to realize they were far too vague. My exhaustion got the better of me, and despite the late hour, I called the B&B's number. "Hello? Hi, is this Marie?" "Yes." "Hey, I'm Cal. I'm supposed to be staying with you tonight." I paused for a confirmation, which didn't come immediately. I thought that maybe she didn't hear me or the line dropped, but when her tired and thin voice returned, she seemed more surprised than anything. "Right, okay. Yeah, it was booked by a woman named Carla Henning. Sorry it's so late. I'm just having a bit of trouble with the directions," I explained. There was another shorter silence followed by a sigh. "Where are you?" It was a fair question, but one that I was unprepared for. I frantically checked my phone for my location, relaying it to her as best as I could. "I'll be right there," she said, hanging up. I was taken aback. I had expected her to explain the directions in more detail, or to possibly stay on the line while I drove. Instead, I felt a little silly that she was coming to get me. After about a half an hour, a low sputtering reached my ears before I saw her truck drive up, red with faded paint and rust. Marie rolled down her window, and I admit I was a little shocked at exactly how ancient she looked. The creases in her face seemed to force her expression into a permanent scowl, and her hair was sparse, yet curiously shaggy. Are you Cal? Yep, that's me. Sorry about all of this, I said, trying to be as repentant as possible. Oh, it's no trouble. The roads around here have a mind of their own if you don't know where you're going. Just follow me. She gave a small but friendly smile as she rolled her window back up. I got back into my car and felt a twinge of guilt, not only for putting her out, but also for my misjudgment. Her truck rumbled louder as she exited the gas station, and not wanting to betray her kindness any further, I quickly followed. After turning off the highway, the road slowly winded and narrowed into a steep path as we entered the Goliath Mountains. Pine trees rose on either side, and even if they weren't so dense, the moonless sky kept me from seeing much beyond the road. Eventually, Marie turned into a large clearing, and I parked beside her, looking around as much as I could. Straight ahead was a 2-story house whose siding may have once been yellow, even if it seemed to have forgotten it. Shingles were missing from the roof, and the chimney was falling apart, but the lights on inside provided some sense of comfort. On the other side of the clearing was a smaller bungalow, with many of the same features and defects, but no warming light from within. I turned off my car before stepping out. Well, that's your house over there. Sorry it's not the bigger one, Marie said with a chuckle. I'll unlock it. She strode ahead through the unkempt grass to the guest house, and I quickly grabbed my bag before catching up in time for her to get inside and turn on the light. I stepped in and examined the decor that no doubt had existed long before either house. A dead fireplace sat across from me, and to my right, a small table with a wood-burning stove behind it. On the other side of the room was a large orange couch, and in all the corners sat strange but beautiful plants. Still, I could sense that something was off. "Where's the bathroom?" I asked. "You can use that bucket there," she responded, pointing to a corner that indeed held a large metal bucket. I thought she might be joking, but her expression suggested otherwise. My disbelief must have been evident, since she was quick to offer an alternative. "You can also use the bathroom in my house if you need to. I'll leave the back door unlocked. That's the pull-out bed there, and if you need anything else, I'm a pretty light sleeper." She then bade me good night and left. Fatigue washed over me, so rather than stay up to read or watch something, I decided to retire to bed. After wrestling with the pull-out and eventually pinning it, I turned out the light and laid down. A curtainless window hung to the right of the front door and directly across from my face. Through it, a quarter moon stared down at me, so I turned over and wondered how long it would take me to fall asleep. I woke up after seemingly no time at all, as judged by the brightness of the moonlight still streaming into the guest house. I hadn't moved, so I was still staring at the back wall and the projected silhouette of the window's cross frame. In the frame's bottom corner, I noticed a shadow and assumed it was a spot of dried paint or some other blemish. My exhaustion was winning once again when a chill ran through my body as I saw the shadow move. It was only for a second, so my mind ran wild with rationalizations. I thought perhaps I hadn't seen it move at all, and if I did, it may be just a swaying bush outside. 10 minutes passed by my guess, and the shadow remained. I knew that if I didn't investigate, sleep would remain a stranger to me, so I decided to turn and look. After some self-persuasion, I spun around, and the thing on the window moved out of sight. I froze, propped up on my elbow, and heard nothing but my heartbeat. I had seen it for barely an instant, so I only made out one detail. However, it was all that was needed to send my fear over the edge, because when I turned to the window, someone's eye had stared back at me. I jumped out of bed and instinctually went for the light, but stopped myself, knowing that it would only give an advantage to the watcher. Grabbing my phone, my worst expectations were fulfilled, as it had no service. With my options diminishing, I summoned up a sliver of courage to confront my night stalker. Picking up a fire poker, I threw open the door before I could convince myself otherwise. Beyond the threshold, I had anticipated the scariest person imaginable, but horrifyingly found no one. I began to think more clearly and deduced that the person may have slipped around the back. Turning left, I crept around the side of the house, approaching the rear, and my guess was confirmed. I saw the back of someone just around the corner. They were cloaked and crouched, probably waiting for me to come around the other side. When I was a footstep behind, I swung my makeshift weapon at the figure's head and stayed only long enough to watch them collapse before I sprinted to the main house. Bursting through the back door, I called out to Marie. Without a response, I began to search the house for her, heading upstairs first. After checking a bathroom and a cluttered storage room, I finally found a bedroom, but the bed was empty. Instead, my gaze was drawn by a collection of scattered pages on a table in the corner. Turning on the light, I looked through them, and from what I could make out, they were the paranoid ramblings of someone far less sane than how Marie had first appeared. Supposedly, she had found something in the mountains. A map was enclosed, showing a nearby lake and a small cave that had been circled with the word camp written in red. In these writings, along with her fear, she seemed also deeply regretful. She was desperate to return what she had taken, but was somehow unable to. There was a constant dread, as she believed that someone was coming for her. While it was unclear who or what this was, she seemed to know when it would come, and that it was inevitable. That was all I could read, and I turned towards the door, only for my heart to drop to my stomach. There, in the doorway, in a ragged and dirty cloak, stood Marie. The wrinkles of her face contorted to mirror her psychosis, now reflecting the woman in the papers behind me. A red trickle ran down her forehead, no doubt from the fire poker I still held. Noticing the kitchen knife in her hand, I froze once again. We stared at each other, waiting for something to happen, and my sight moved to the wall on her right. A calendar hung there, with an impressionist ocean painting and a circle around today's date. "Marie, listen," I tried to mediate. She interrupted by charging at me, blade first, and I jumped onto the bed to leap around the doorway. She came at me again, so I swung the fire poker once more, but only succeeded in embedding it into the wall. Unable to get it loose, and with my rampaging host before me, I chose to leave my only defense and flee. I flew down the stairs, but felt her bounding close behind me. Breaking through the front door, I ran to my car and tried to open it before realizing that my keys were still in the guest house. I barely had time to curse before Marie was upon me again, and I was forced to run in the other direction, into the forest. Branches whipped my face, and I stumbled over nature's uncounted and unseen obstacles as I plunged into the dark of the wood. I'm not sure how long it was before I checked behind me, but once I did, I was punished with a large stump that sent me landing flat on my face. I quickly scanned my surroundings, finding that Marie was nowhere to be seen, and hearing nothing of her strangely energetic chase. After making sure I wasn't seriously injured, I dusted myself off and weighed my options. Going back was obviously the worst idea, but I struggled to think of much else. At last, I decided to walk further into the forest, hoping to discover my salvation elsewhere. Either due to the cover of clouds or the density of the trees, the moon provided only a glimmer. I still had my phone, and although it couldn't make calls, it could still light my way. With a half-dead battery, though, I tried my best to feel my way around instead. Staying calm while doing that, though, was not an easy feat. It wasn't enough that this forest was dark and alien, but like most others, it was loud. Trees creaked, the wind whistled, and animals called out to each other. More than once, the otherworldly cry of an elk sent me into a cold sweat before I realized what it was. Surprisingly, though, and thankfully, none of my frequent stops to look around me ever came up with anything. Before long, I broke through the forest's edge, and the shimmering blackness of a lake lay before me. As expected, a cave emerged from the ground to the right. Marie had marked this area camp, so in my desperate mind, I hoped that there may be something useful inside, even perhaps a radio. The entrance was smaller than expected, and was so close to the shoreline that I needed to sidle along the water's edge to enter. Once I did, I was met with a steep slope that almost got the better of me as I descended into the earth. The moonlight reached about halfway down, so once I found the bottom, I was in complete darkness. It was at this point that I gave in and sparingly used my phone to examine my surroundings. Ahead was a narrow hallway stretching forward into unseen depths. The suffocating shadow made pressing on difficult, but I still held on to my sliver of courage. With the hallway appearing perfectly straight, I tried to keep my light off as much as possible. However, the fear of walking into something horrible or falling into some unknown pit did not keep me blind for long. The only sounds were my footsteps and breathing, echoing through the passage. The rhythm they formed only amplified the solitude that I was trying very hard to fend off. Of course, when that feeling disappeared, it became all the worse. It started slow, a barely noticeable noise that likely occurred a few times before I became aware of it. Eventually, though, my foot scraped the cave floor at the same time that a heavier, dragging sound came from behind. I turned around immediately and heard nothing, unsure if it was my imagination. Unfortunately, the disorienting blackness stretching out on either side didn't help. After listening for several more silent moments, I turned back and continued. However, the noise was cruel, as right when I felt slightly comfortable again, it returned. Like before, I stopped and listened to the emptiness. Silence once again. I was about to continue when a far worse rendition of the noise erupted. I could hear with certainty something heavy and rough being dragged on the ground in short repetition. I did not have time to analyze it further, since, after a pause, it transformed into a continuous slither. Without hesitation, I turned and fled, praying the hallway would finally end in safety. My legs burned, and I started to think the tunnel might indeed be endless. Finally, my hand left the wall as I entered a new area. I could make out a door behind me, so as my pursuer grew closer, I slammed the door and held it with all my weight. The horrible dragging became louder, and my confidence in that thin barrier waned. Right when it sounded as if the thing was about to crash through, a silence came instead. I pressed my ear to the wood, holding my breath to hear the slightest indication of something on the other side. After waiting for what seemed like long enough, I stepped away. I almost opened the door again, but a second thought convinced me otherwise. Instead, realizing my phone light was still on, I used it to look around. The first thing I noticed was the circular room I was in, about 15 feet in diameter. The second was my phone's battery, which had dropped to 9%. I would have turned it off right away if something on the wall hadn't caught my eye. There, a mural of swirling designs formed odd shapes and menacing figures, despite appearing completely abstract. I followed the fresco until it culminated symmetrically across from the entrance. The patterns pointed down at a pedestal against the wall, with an indent carved into the top. I assumed it would have held some object or artifact, but there was nothing there. I searched the rest of the room, initially finding only dust and stone. Eventually, though, I discovered two familiar things, which at that moment had become truly terrifying. There were a pair of shoes, which, as my light traveled upwards, I saw was attached to none other than Marie in the now open doorway. Dried blood plastered her face, and both her clothes and hair were caked with mud. Her eyes burned, seeming to make my light obsolete, and the kitchen knife was still clutched in her hand. "Of course you're here," she croaked out. With a cry, she prepared to lunge at me, but something stopped her. In the tunnel behind, the heavy dragging had returned, and Marie turned to face it. It grew louder as it filled the chamber, and right before its source appeared, my phone died. A symphony of screams followed, both human and not, that I cannot recall without shuddering. I did not feel anything, but from what it sounded like, Marie would soon be no more. Sure enough, the screaming stopped, but it did not yield to silence as whatever the thing was slithered around. I stood as still and quiet as possible, praying it would leave and that I would finally be able to as well. This was proven useless, with something rough touching my leg before latching on in an instant. I soon felt my entire body immersed in this texture, no matter how much I fought. I wondered how long I would be able to stay conscious before finally being consumed. I awoke to a lack of oxygen and something still surrounding me, which I quickly realized was water. I saw the reassuring light of the moon above me and swam up, breaching the surface of the lake. After coughing up more water than I thought my lungs could hold, I saw my surroundings, including the lakeside cave now crumbled, barring anyone else from entry. Tallow. I spotted a village from the train window. It emerged from gray fields, its houses crooked upon the short slope of a hillside. Tallow, that was its name, possessed a certain sadness, as if it longed to be forgotten. A manor, with its many wings and porticos, loomed over the houses from the hill's peak. There were few signs of life when I exited the train. No one walked the streets, and all the curtains were closed. It stunk of old cabbages and sulfur. In the distance, children played, but no school or playground existed in the village. The hotel keeper was asleep when I entered, her chin slumped upon her chest, and a pair of reading glasses hanging from a string of pearl-like beads rested upon her chest. I felt rude ringing the bell, but even when I did, it took several trills until she woke up. She weighed me with a single glance. "You're the guest?" she said. "Well, I should hope so," I said. Immediately, I regretted the joke. She slid the key across the reception desk with disdain. "There's no breakfast now," she said. "You'll have to wait till later if you want to eat anything." In the lobby, the rack was dense with coats and hats. Boots lined up alongside the wall. Despite this, while climbing the stairs and searching through the labyrinthine corridors for my room, I heard no one. Aside from myself, the hotel was unoccupied. My room was the bare minimum. A single bed, a wardrobe for 3 shirts at best, and a portrait, sun-stained, of some once green forest. I had come away to write, and for the first 3 mornings, this was what I did. After consuming a breakfast of runny eggs and bacon, cooked up reluctantly by the hotel keeper, I came upstairs and sat for an hour at my desk, doing little of anything, before heading out for a walk. Usually, I would arrive back in time for lunch, then I would try again to write, fail, somehow more miserably, and head out for yet another walk. At first, my walks avoided the manor on the hill. I walked instead through the dead fields surrounding Tallow, seeing little more than a few bony horses and the occasional abandoned tractor. A drought had been scouring the south for some months. Occasionally, in the far distance, you would see someone standing outside their house, hand on hips, looking toward the cloudless sky. It seemed you could not get away from the manor wherever you walked. Its windows followed you across fields and into woods, over streams and up hills. As time wore on, my walks seemed to draw closer to it, until I was trespassing upon the grounds themselves. Once, just once, I spotted the groundskeeper. A huge man, a whole head taller than me, with a bag of suet over his shoulder. He nodded with a gnarled intensity and dumped down the bag. I hurried on. "Who owns the house on the hill?" I asked the hotel keeper one morning. She frowned and placed down the breakfast. Then she sat opposite me, as if this question could not be answered standing. "That's the Macintoshes," she said. "Rufus? Cordelia? I forget the names of the twins." "What do they do?" "They own Tallow," she said. "The town?" "Yes." At night, I began to hear the growl of a motor car. It started in the distant hills, grew closer and closer, then ripped past the window and howled off into the night. The sound seemed larger than the village itself, as if I could place my arm out the window and feel the very air vibrating. I soon found myself waiting for it by the window. I finally spotted the car on the 4th night, its headlights beaming down the country lanes like twin stars before illuminating the village in sheer white light. It sped past, a dark green beetle of a car, its hood down and its driver guiding it confidently, almost arrogantly, with a single hand, his other splayed across the passenger seat. "Who was that?" I asked the hotel keeper after returning from my walk the next day. "Rufus," she said, and shook her head as if I should have known this by now. "He's in one of those moods." The hotel possessed a single cramped bar, really no more than a cupboard stocked with alcohol. The hotel keeper would stand in there, usually from 3 to 5, and then again from 7 until 9. I came in from my walk, and for once, she was not alone. A voice, filled with the hearty opulence of the British countryside. We thank you, the room, as always, for showing us, for listening, for liking the videos, come into the light, to the channel. Let's get a look at you. Please, we haven't seen a guest in check years. Out some of the other works of these authors. The voice belongs until next time, everyone. A glass of whiskey. Take care of yourselves. He smiled broadly, revealing graying gums and a vast set of crooked, yellowing teeth. He had on a tweed waistcoat, its top sprinkled with dandruff. Almost immediately, I did not want to be in his company. "What brings you to Tallow?" he said. "I came to write," I said. I hated that I said this, but something about his manner meant I could not lie. "Excellent," he said. "Most excellent. You will return to the city with many splendid poems detailing our beautiful town, its beautiful countryside, its..." I waited, but he said no more. "Certainly," I said at last. He smiled, clenching his teeth together so that they may be admired. "I won't detain you long," he said. "The muse calleth, the blank page beckon, all of that." "Well, thank you," I said, and turned to go. He held up a finger. "There is one more thing, if I can say, and this will be awfully forward of me, but you look to have the most wonderfully soft hands. It would be a pleasure to me if I could touch them." I remained in the doorway. "Come on," he said. "Come closer." Something in me, politeness let's call it, compelled me across the room. I held out my hand to him. He took a sip of whiskey and placed the glass meaningfully down. Then he leaned close to inspect my hands. The dim light shone upon his moist lips. With calloused fingertips, he traced slow, gut-wrenching circles across my palm. "Yes," he said. "Lovely." He pushed my hand back towards me, as if returning it. "Thank you," he said, and he gave me one last awful look at his teeth to remember him. "It's Rufus McIntosh, by the way," he said, as if I had not already sensed this fact. In my room, I ran my hand under hot water and scrubbed it with soap until it began to ache. No matter how long I worked for, I couldn't seem to get it clean. I noticed on the doorsteps of the village sat a set of tawny, whittled dolls. Many wore dresses or waistcoats. I expected the children of the village, who, still, I could hear playing in the distance, would steal these dolls, but that did not appear to occur. At the hotel, the keepers had a tiny straw bonnet, which she adjusted so it sat askew on the doll's head. A day after I met Rufus McIntosh in the hotel bar, I discovered a crow outside of my door. Dead, obviously, with both wings removed and crammed into a shoebox. The scent of rotting flesh had penetrated my room while I wrote. When I finally stepped outside, the stench overwhelmed me, and I hurled my guts into the toilet bowl. Downstairs, when I had finally gathered myself, I told the hotel keeper about the bird I had found. I tossed the shoebox onto the counter. She eyed it with a certain melancholy. "That can't be helped," she said. "Can't be helped? What do you mean it can't be helped?" "It's just part of it." "Part of what?" "Tallow." She took the shoebox and placed it under the desk. She sighed. "I suppose you'll be wanting a discount." Nothing I wrote seemed to stick. If I wrote a sentence in the morning, I would return in the afternoon and find the words jumbled. But always when I sat down at my desk, it seemed as if I were seeing things truly for the first time. my pen moving rapidly across the paper, solving issues of consciousness and morality with a few pithy phrases. I was enjoying my work, perhaps for the first time ever, but it seemed all I was producing was nonsense. I still went for walks. Often I saw Rufus on the balcony, looking up towards the sky, attempting, it seemed, to make the heavens open up through willpower alone. If he spotted me, he raised his hand in greeting and smiled. Even from some distance, I could make out his teeth. The invitation was for dinner, that night, 7 o'clock. "Bring some poetry, boy," it said in blue ink scrawled beneath the address. "Regale us." "You won't be needing supper then," the hotel keeper said when she delivered it. By the time the appointed hour came round, I was dressed in my best outfit and waiting in the hotel lobby. It felt excessively hot, and I could not get comfortable in the chair. I felt I should have left the village of Tallow at that moment and headed back to the city. But I stayed, stupidly, rashly, believing I would get some answers. I heard the purr of Rufus's motor car approaching through the country lanes. He entered the lobby beaming. "Come on, old chap," he said. "Supper's waiting." Outside, his car puttered on the driveway. The interior was flaking leather. Rufus climbed in after me. "Let's hit the road," he said, and wrenched the mighty gear lever into position. The car growled beneath his feet. Before I could adjust my seatbelt, I was thrust back into the seat as the car hurtled on towards the hill. Houses, bushes, and trees all streamed past. The wind cut viciously into my eyes. I glanced at Rufus. Tears streamed from his eyes, but he seemed to take a sinister delight in the pain. Over the howl of the engine, Rufus shouted, "Sorry about the short notice, my boy, but I heard soon you'd be leaving us. I thought you may as well see the manor before you go." "Thank you," I said. "What?" "Thank you." He cranked the gear lever once again, and with a crunching shift of his feet, the car shifted in speed and momentum to get careened around a corner. I was almost thrown through the window. "Almost there," he shouted. True enough, we arrived. The car crunching across the gravel, spitting stones from the wheels. The final stop jolted me towards the dashboard. My heart was hammering and my vision blurry, and already he was ushering me out. "Come on," he said, glancing up at the sky. "No time to waste." Cordelia awaited in a long, poorly lit room at a table spanning almost its entire length. She sat near its head, her wheelchair pressed up against the wood, an empty plate before her. She was veiled and wore a black lace dress, incredibly intricate. Her white silk gloves, like a pair of snakeskins, sat beside the plate. Rufus came over and touched his lips to his hand. "A delight," she said when I entered, and held out a hand for me to kiss. I could not see her face, so I could not tell her expression, but I bent to her hand and touched my lips to it. She was freezing, and her skin tasted like moss. "Please," she said, "take a seat." They sat me at the head of the table. When the first course arrived, toast with pâté, they paused, both of them, to see how I would eat it. After I began scraping the paste across the toast, they shared a look, as if to confirm something, and then they too began spreading pâté upon their toast. "Rufus tells me that you're a writer," Cordelia said. "That is true." A fiction writer? Yes, I said. He's really very good, Rufus said, mouth full, flecks of toast on his teeth. I have read all of his books. I, of course, had never published a book. In truth, I was a really very unsuccessful writer. It was, at best, a hobby to me. You have the right shape of cranium for it, Cordelia said. And you have inquisitive eyes. I suspect you are rather good at water sports as well. I didn't know if that was true or not, and Rufus gave a little chuckle. This is my wife, he said. A scientist, always working away in her laboratory, tinkering, delving deep. Truly, it is all beyond me. I must read your earlobe, she said. I suspected it was perhaps the wine and a slightly empty stomach, but this idea, which normally would have filled me with horror, felt sound. Before I knew it, the second course was arriving. It was mozzarella and tomatoes, but the tomatoes were unripe and gave way with soggy ease. When I ate them, I am too polite. They had already turned tart. The mozzarella I dared not touch. This did not stop the Macintoshes devouring their meal, though. They ate as if they had been starving for days, often foregoing their knives and forks and using their hands to push the food into their mouths. Come the end of the course, Rufus had tomato juice down his chin, and the hands of Cordelia were spotted with food. Your earlobe, Cordelia said, tapping on the table. I wish to inspect it. My apologies, Rufus said. I suspect this is all a ruse. I told her you had the most perfectly soft hands. I laid my cheek upon the table. She wished to look at the right earlobe. The left, she said, was often a liar. I felt safe doing this for some reason. It was around then that I noticed I felt entirely safe altogether. That the feelings of anxiety and turmoil that had accompanied me prior to this trip had dissipated. That in fact, the anxiety and turmoil that had haunted my whole life had flown away as well. I focused upon the fingers tracing my ear and felt almost bliss. I smiled at Rufus, and he smiled back, innocently back. You're beginning to enjoy it then, he said. Yes, I said. I think I am. It was at that moment that Cordelia leaned suddenly forward and clamped her teeth forcefully down on my ear. Before I could speak, she'd bitten through the cartilage and swallowed it whole. I passed out. How could you not? When I woke, my left ear was gone. A patch of bloody flatness remained. They stored me in the barn, alone. Once a day, the groundskeeper arrived with my feed. He pushed the bucket through the feed slot and waited for me to eat, sitting, smoking, and watching. When I was done, he took the bucket. He felt sorry for me, he said. His voice was a low growl. Well, then let me out, I said. But he shook his head. In time, he said. A few moons. He looked skyward and nodded once. In the nights, I dug at the ground to the back of my cell. The dirt was dry and rough. After an hour, my hands were bloody from the effort. I lost nails and turned my hands black, but I did not stop digging. Eventually, I was able to tunnel under the boundary wall, pull myself under and out. A pair of purple bruises shaped like kidneys still adorned my hips. I fled into the night. Though tallow glowered below, I did not trust the locals any longer. I found safety in the trunk of a fallen tree and sheltered there for a night. They hunted me. Rufus's motor car tearing through the countryside, its lights emerging over the crests of hills and sending a searching white cone into the darkness. I emerged come dawn, lacking sleep, and hobbled on, my stomach growling. Eventually, I came to a new town, a new hotel, and managed to persuade them to let me stay. How disheveled I must have looked standing in their foyer with my ear lost and my clothes bloodied. They provided me with a small, ill-outfitted room. That night, in the cramped confines of a single bed, I heard the howling of a car again. I left, once again, before dawn. It went like this for several days, me finding some place to camp, Rufus pursuing. I was heading, vaguely, for London. I still am, really, though there's no knowing of when I shall arrive, given my kinking and arduous passage through the quiet country towns. There have been times when Rufus has grown close. I've spotted his car outside of various hotels, parked on the roadside gates while he stalks across an empty field. I know, inevitably, he will catch me. When, however, is undetermined. Despite this, every night I dream of Tallow. Not nightmares, but a kind of strange nostalgic reverie. I wonder if there's a part of me that wishes to be caught. Perhaps there's that part in all of us. Perhaps that is why, an hour or so before bed, I unlatch the window and leave it open, just a crack, just an inch, so that while I sleep, anyone may enter. Well, alright everyone, that is the last story in our second installment of Bloody Bits, curated stories from up-and-coming authors. This batch of stories was especially fun for us to read, as we really enjoyed each and every story within. We hope that you enjoyed them as well, and if you did, please look in the video description to find more information about the authors, so that if you choose, you can sink your teeth into some of their other works. Again, we thank you, as always, for showing up, for listening, for liking the videos, and subscribing to the channel. Please do check out some of the other works of these authors. Until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves, and please have sweet dreams.